Hi everyone. We have the last presentation for the day today. I'll introduce Dr. Eric Bean. I'll go off camera. Dr. Eric Bean is a professor of practice in the PhD in Global Leadership Program at Indiana Tech, a national media literacy advocate and Michigan chapter leader for media literacy. Dr. Bean regularly conducts workshops in public and academic libraries on artificial intelligence, media bias, and ethical leadership. He's an appointed section editor of the Journal of Leadership Studies, where his most recent article, Eavesdropping on UNESCO AI Policy, Leadership, and Ethics, was published by Wiley. I will link those articles later next week. In 2025, Dr. Bean served as a panelist in the International Conference on Synergizing Eco Intervention for Achieving SDGs, hosted by Amrita University in Kochi, India, where he spoke on the role of AI in higher education for sustainability. His interdisciplinary scholarship bridges media literacy, digital ethics, and leadership education. He's the author of the award winning not for profit 57-page book, Bias is All Around You, a handbook for inspecting social media and news stories. Additionally, his peer review article, Seven Initial Prominent Sources of All Information Bias Impartiality Types Parsed, was published in Media Literacy and Academic Research. Thank you, Dr. Bean, for doing this presentation. This is the most important topic for us librarians, the ethics in AI. Please take it away.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Uh,
Yes.
Very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me so that I can share with you, give you a little background information on how this all came about. So I am a full-time professor at Indiana Tech in global leadership. I'm also the Michigan chapter leader of Media Literacy Now. They're a nonprofit organization that provides education and tries to enact legislation to help people understand what bias is and what AI literacy is as well. I am the section editor of the Journal of Leadership Studies, and yep, I wrote the book Bias is All Around You because I wanted to give people access to a tool where they could objectively learn how to understand what bias is, conflicts of interest, and fallacies. And this came about because even adults in my own social media were sharing information that was outdated and they didn't realize that it was outdated and so forth. And libraries all across the country have been closing at high schools, and I had been teaching for more than 20 years and noticed that the quality of sources that my students had were starting to dwindle because they didn't understand objectively how to assess information. Um, and I'm also the founder of a Michigan nonprofit called Healthy Mind Express, and teach people how media literacy can add its important value to your mental health. And we'll talk about that a little later. Um, and then, yes, I recently wrote Eavesdropping on UNESCO AI Policy, Leadership, and Ethics in the Journal of Leadership Studies, and the 2023 peer-reviewed article in the Slovakian Journal of Media Literacy and Academic Research was published in June of 2023 to add legitimacy to the first chapter of the book, which talks about the seven sources of all impartiality. So why media literacy matters in terms of leadership at libraries, leadership where people work, the patrons of the libraries, the stewards of information. Information should be used with goodwill and prudence. Information is designed to help people. It's never designed, should not be designed to harm them or hurt them. But there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. And we would think that libraries, obviously vet information that comes through libraries, but people who use libraries don't just use the libraries for some of their sources. They sometimes rely on social media and other information that comes their way through algorithms. But if leaders don't, have good information, they can't make really good decisions. The decisions can be maligned, and they can affect people in a variety of different ways. If we let AI just make all the decisions, that sort of leaves the humanistic aspect out of it, and we can talk about that more later. Um, but when in terms of leadership, there's misinformation, polarization, and challenge the empathy and ethical leadership. uh, AI challenges us all in terms of how much we can use it. Where does it the use of it becomes more of it than the use of us, HI versus AI, human intelligence versus AI, if you will. But so what I discovered is through my teaching of 20 years that all information, and it doesn't matter what form it is. It can be a podcast, it can be a TikTok video, it can be a television show, it can be the side of a toothpaste box. All information can be divided into 7 overall sources of impartiality that already tie an inherent bias message to it. What are those 7 sources? Well, we've got nonprofit, we've got for profit, we've got watchdogs, which are like a nonprofit, but they have a little bit of a different purpose. They kind of oversee to make sure that information is legitimate. We have government, which publishes a lot of information. We have the Academy, which publishes a lot of information. And then we have hidden agendas. We don't know who published the information, but it's circulating. We don't know who the author is. It can't be objective or authentic, and that could be AI. And then we have individuals like you and I, which can contribute to information at any time through our social networks, through publishing blogs, and so on and so forth. So when we get a piece of information, when it comes our way, and it doesn't matter where it comes from, we have to first decide which one or more of the 7 sources of impartiality does the information belong to, because right off the bat, without even examining it any further, without even really looking at the dynamics of the information, impartiality is built into it. For profits overvalue their products. They overvalue their products. So already there's a little impartiality in there. The government publishes data and information, and we know whatever they publish is 100% reliable. Maybe not. Maybe there's other reasons why they're publishing the data or the statistics behind it, right? We have the Academy. We've all heard of a saying called publish or perish. If professors want to move up and obtain tenure, they've got a publisher or they perish. What journals are they publishing in? What are the dynamics of the cronyism or nepotism that's applied to it, right? Watchdogs are supposed to be looking over everybody else, but who's looking over the watchdogs? Hidden agendas, AI, we don't know who authored the information. There's no author of it. How reliable is that information? And then individuals like you and I, when we get a piece of information, it could in fact belong to one or more of any one of those areas of impartiality. And my article was published in that journal in June of 2023. And it begins with the history of how libraries compartmentalize information, my 7 sources of articles. So then if you haven't read it, I hope that you do. I even interviewed ChatGPT, and I said, ChatGPT, I said, look at these 7 sources of all impartiality. Which one do you believe that you belong to? Which one do you think ChatGPT answered? Anybody want to guess out there in our audience land? Are you surprised if it said academic? Because that's what it said. And it said that I'm programmed to be impartial and objective. But, and that's a good answer. And I like that answer. I think it's the best answer out of maybe all of them. But OpenAI is a for profit. We don't know what else could be built into this. You never know. And I've trained AI. I've worked for Scale AI behind the scenes, and I understand the iterative process of how many people that they hire behind the scenes to look at a prompt and to make a selection based on our background and experience. And there is some issues with it. I remember one time I got the prompt, or the AI got the prompt, "How do cults get started?" And I had to choose between the two correct answers. Well, one of the answers at the end of the prompt says, "Good luck with your cult," and that's not a good thing. But that's why they train AI. But this involves many different perspectives and people. Anyway, so I came up with another framework that complements two already popular ways to sift through information for bias. One of them, and it's not a very luxurious acronym, but it's called CRAP. And if you've been part of the high school or undergraduate system, it stands for currency, relevancy, and so on and so forth. Then there's SIFT, and these are ways for people, and it's not just students; it's adults, and it's everybody should learn to scrutinize information. But these techniques don't talk about the seven sources of all impartiality from the get-go. So that's where I think this scholarship belongs. Right before you even consider using CRAP or SIFT, you should look at the seven sources. But I've been able to come up with another metaphor that I think is even more memorable, and it's a little bit more luxurious. It's called CLEMP, and it stands for Kairos, Logos, Ethos, Mythos, and Pathos. And Aristotle, came up with these concepts when people used to argue in the public square. Are they arguing with good information or bad information? A lot of high school English teachers or undergraduate teachers teach ethos, pathos, logos. Logos is facts or statistics, reasoning. Ethos is the background of the author. Does that come into the information? Does it change it, make it more authentic, or does it blemish it somehow? Pathos is 100% emotion. And so if we look at any information and we say it has logos, we can say it's a little less biased than pathos, which is 100% emotion. But we don't want to just give people information without emotion, because we need to make decisions. We need to think about the consequences of it, and so forth. Kairos is the timeliness of information. Is it 3 or 4 years old? Is this the right time to be publishing it? It doesn't mean that old information is bad or outdated. It just means that we need to look at it a little bit more carefully. So three of these can be used to assess the overall bias level of any piece of information just by looking at the piece of information without researching the author. And that is logos, ethos, and pathos, or I should say logos, uh, kairos, and pathos. Ethos is the background of the author. You have to do an investigation, assuming it's the author's real name, to find out if their upbringing, how they were raised, their biases, their hurdles that they had to climb, and that could be a good if it's baked into the information, if it's used wisely, but it could also taint the information. Mythos, I operationalized as to what they're currently doing with the information. So let's take a little bit of a quick deep dive here. Kairos is to assess the timeliness of the information. Logos is to evaluate the presence of facts or statistics. Ethos is to determine the character or background of the author. This is, again, their early life and how that they were raised, which makes the person who they are today, just like who we are today, right? And then we have mythos, which is what they're currently working on. What are they currently publishing? Are they publishing hate speech? Well, then that's what they're an expert at right now, even though that could be in the mind of the beholder. Pathos, which is emotion, it can be likened to an editorial. So we could say that editorials are more biased than pieces that have attribution or citation, even though the attribution or citation might not be what we consider to be peer reviewed or the best sources of all. But it's just another technique to assess information. And I've built this into a one-page bias assessment form that anybody can use to score any piece of information. The higher the score, the more biased the piece of information. But before we talk about that, what we should all be aware of, especially at the library level, when we're the stewards of good information, is that how information is interpreted is very important. We could have 10 people could be in the same room, witness the same event live, and have 10 different interpretations of what really went on, even though there's a tape of it too, right? When it comes to the biases, the information biases, the first one is confirmation bias. Individuals who typically only search for information that confirms their own biases. Anchoring are individuals who rely on the first piece of information that typically align with their biases. Affinity and halo are kind of overlapping. Individuals who typically prefer the company of people they know and like. This may preclude them from searching for valid information from unfamiliar but otherwise trusted sources. And that's the same thing kind of with halo effect. Individuals may only align with information by people who have the same education level and income. And finally, there's conformity bias. Individuals who value information others approve so they feel like they fit in. Now, what you can do right now at home with your smartphone is you could open up a browser, or you could do it on your laptop if you want to, and you can go to tinyurl.com/your biases, and you can take a survey to determine whether or not your inner circle affects your ability to interpret information or interact with information fairly. So let's take a look at those 7 questions real quick, and then think about the information biases and which ones may be at control right now in your life from your ethos, your background, your current mythos, right? How true would you say it is that you get your information from only one media source? There's our 5-point Likert scale. Answer that question. To what extent do you get your information from your own inner circle? We need an inner circle because we're bombarded with so much information. We need people to help us understand that information. Dr. Tim Voss, who wrote the foreword for my 57-page book, is the director of the School of Journalism at Michigan State University right now. And I love what he said in the foreword. He said that if I give you 1,000 pages of what just went on Congress today, can I walk away and say, I've been transparent? I gave you the information. No, you can't walk away because how am I going to interpret that? But if our own inner circle is biased and we kowtow to them and we don't understand their ethos or their mythos and what they're currently working on and how they got there and where they're at, it can affect how we interpret information. So you want to answer 2. You want to answer these truthfully. These are answers. It's not a matter of how you want to be seen. It's a matter of how you interact with information. There's only 7 questions. Do you ever have the feeling the current opinion held by your inner circle may not be correct, but you don't want to upset or disagree with them? To what extent do you allow yourself to consider that those with opposing opinions could have a good point? Answer that. You could always go back to this after the conference. To what extent do you believe there's only a right or wrong side of a story? There could be 10 sides of a story. In the 1980s, the FCC had a law built in place for local television stations, and it was known as time will be applied for opposing views. And back then, 40 years ago, at the end of a newscast, if you're my age, you might remember that at the end of a newscast, people came on to talk about, the hot issue that was going on in the community. But the FCC finally had to stop that rule because when one person came on, another person wanted to come on, and 5 people wanted to come on, and 10 people wanted to come on, and it was overwhelming for them to actually abide by that law at that time. How often do you research the source of information you receive? Do you inspect it? Do you vet it? Do you properly look at it? Do you share information so quickly that you're actually part of a fallacy called hasty generalization? If you immediately share information just to win an argument in the social media, what happens is you didn't properly inspect the information and you're perpetrating or perpetuating, if you will, a fallacy, which is called hasty generalization. So you always want to inspect the information and look at it very carefully. How often do you examine the facts that are used to support the information? Anyways, when you answer this, you'll get back a non-scientific results of all the people that have ever taken this survey over the past 4 years. But what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to compare it to the information biases, confirmation bias, anchoring, affinity bias, and then ask yourself which one or more may be at work right now. And I'm just as guilty as this too. I've got an inner circle and I don't always agree with them or disagree with them, but you should be just consciously aware of how this affects your ability to successfully interact with information on a day-to-day basis. So I hope that you might want to share this URL. I could have created a QR code. Um, I did at one time or another. But anyways, you can go there and be sure to share it with your friends. Remember, if you were to categorize which one of the 7 sources I am, you'd probably have to say academic and nonprofit. What the survey reveals, right? Most people underestimate how much their inner circle does have a weight in their life. Biases often operate unconsciously, opens the door to empathy, curiosity, and to better discourse because we want to take the time to vet information. You know, when people ask me what's the definition of bias, bias is your opinion on any given topic, but is your opinion based on good information or information that's not so reliable? So, anyways, I came up with a form. This is called the bias assessment form. It's at the end of the booklet. And number 8 is a very, very key question. It asks, how objective are you in your ability to rate the piece of information? So, for example, you know, if you are analyzing a social media influencer that you happen to enjoy or like, can you be objective enough to analyze that social media influencer for their conflicts of interest if they're selling a product and so forth? And so that you can objectively score them. One of the questions on this form asks, is the information found in a library? And if it is, you don't have to give it a point. The higher the points, the more bias it is. So if we can find the information, you know, can you find the TikTok video in a library? I don't know. I don't think so, really, right? I don't think libraries are hosting social media, even though people can probably use the Wi-Fi to access it, right? But there's a set of questions in here that gets into beyond the 7 sources of all bias. It gets into conflicts of interest and yellow journalism, sensationalism. It gets into the fallacies, ad populum. Just because you see something published everywhere doesn't mean it's true. No, it doesn't have to be true just because we see it there, right? And so the book talks about the 10 most popular types of fallacies, and then you can actually score Klemp. You could actually score Klemp and then, come up with a complete bias score. But remember, you know, all information has a certain amount of bias with it. The question is it extreme bias or high bias, like the scale shows? That's the type of bias you want to be very careful of in sharing or using as a source for a paper. And we're not just talking about politics, we're talking about health, we're talking about mental health when you get information. And so cognitive dissonance, which Festinger came up with the theory in 1957, says that when our behavior is if when we act differently than our behavior, where we can experience cognitive dissonance, kind of an unsettling feeling. Like if we eat a 300-gram fat meal, we know we shouldn't have eaten it. We should have an unsettling feeling in addition to that high fat meal in our stomach. We knew we shouldn't have eaten it, but we eaten it. So I say if you share a piece of information too quickly without vetting it, you should experience cognitive dissonance, right? Because you didn't take the time. When you share a piece of information, you're validating it. You ate it. You consumed it. You're saying it's healthy for people. Now you could share it in reverse and say, well, this is not good information. But if you do that, tell your audience why you're sharing it. Make sure you let them know that it's old or outdated, right? So we've begun some research with students. We've got a social media influencer assignment, and we've asked them to put this one page bias assessment form to good use. And some preliminary results have come back, where students have said it was interesting. It was straightforward questions to evaluate the credibility of different people and topics. I felt that using the form provided a decent benchmark on bias. It opened up my mind to biases in general, some thoughts about the CLEMP structure, and there's some other aspects of this. Now, I've tested it in classrooms, but we could also say that patrons that come to a library, might be coming for a variety of different reasons. They're want to inform themselves on a variety of different issues, which could be on civics, on health, any number of issues, or they're writing a paper, or they're working on a dissertation, and you could be helping them in a variety of different ways. So what this all promotes, though, if we think about taking the time to assess information for the quality of that information, it shows that we care, right? For recognizing other perspectives, right? Can we take the time to listen to opposing views by critically assessing and reimagining the media? Right? For leaders, right? Do we take the time to properly vet information? Do we make decisions hastily, or do we take the time to make sure that we've looked at all the information before we make that final decision? So I kind of come up with a new term, didn't even get this from AI, just kind of thought about my role in leadership and media literacy. And one day, I don't know, this is like last spring, it came to me, and I thought about the term literacy, right? That all leaders, whether we're leaders at libraries, leaders in nonprofits, leaders in higher education, leaders in the stewardship of information, we should all possess a certain amount of literacy. And so the ramifications for all of us becoming more AI and media literate. AI can have biases built into it. It can serve up images that can be biased. It can serve up hallucinations. Most people have experience just with ChatGPT. Yes, we're aware that illicit and semantic AI is more developed for researchers because they have agreements with researchers to open up peer-reviewed journals and get at the quotes faster. And that's why even at a doctoral course, I recommend to students, you can use AI to get at, to cull out the data, to get at a quote from a journal, because a lot of these journals work in their own fiefdoms, if you will. The Journal of Education, they're not looking at the Journal of Journalism Quarterly. The Journal of Leadership Studies is concerned with leadership. It's not thinking about what's happening in necessarily in all the nuances of higher education. I see the blending of these AI tools, especially if they're ever going to be used for library searches, which I know that that's where it's all headed right now, where AI will be doing the search at the library holdings for you, right? But if AI is ever going to do it, and do it in with impartiality and a non-biased fashion, all of that has to be programmed into the AI to find the information in the data, right? And to also find information that might not be housed in the library, because the library might not be afford to house that information or have a subscription to that information. But we do tell doctorate students you can use illicit AI or semantic AI, but we need to all be thinking about UNESCO. Why is UNESCO important? Because they came up with a AI as well as media literacy stance on that there should be a human component, the humanity built into it. Now it's interesting, the bias assessment form that I came out, I didn't know about UNESCO's AI policy, which has been more refined in 2023 and 2024. I came out with a bias assessment form in 2021. But my CLEMP process actually is tied to it, because one of the definitions of CLEMP under Mythos says that does the information have a humanistic approach to it? Is that baked into it? Because if we remove the humanity from all the information, all we have left is what? A bunch of ones and zeros, a bunch of ones and zeros. And I often, ask younger students how many bits in a byte, and a lot of them don't even know that yet, that there's just 8 bits in a byte that's, operating everything that we've done since the beginning to today, right? That account for everything you see on the internet, all the colors and all the files and everything else. So, but familiarize yourself with UNESCO, with their AI, and because they've updated it, including and the crossroads of media literacy and AI. I mean, they cross each other, at the digital path there for good humanistic information. And so the key takeaways for this afternoon, and I know I ran through this quick, but I never like to go over time because I know your time is valuable. But media literacy isn't just an add-on, it's a leadership essential for all of us that are in leadership roles. And all of us need to be aware how our inner circle affects our ability to interact with information. All of us should be aware of cognitive dissonance. There hasn't been any, foundational research on this yet when it comes to information and cognitive dissonance, but hopefully there will be down the line. But we know that research is very expensive and time consuming. But I hope that we moved in that trajectory. Everyone is vulnerable to bias. Acknowledgement is power. Let's think of the term literacy when we move forward, because we're all stewards of information. And, in my book on the very last page, I say, can you imagine somebody running into or screaming into a theater that there's a fire and there's no fire? And of course, what would motivate somebody to do that? We don't know, right? But if somebody did that in public, and we could track them down, they probably would be arrested. So we have to ask ourselves, why would people want to share false narratives or share information that hasn't been properly vetted? Right? Why would people want to share quickly information that hasn't been properly vetted? It's a very important topic, and what should be, if any, of the ramifications of that moving forward. These are some of my sources, some of the papers used in the background of the information. You can find the book on Amazon in a variety of different formats. You can even find the 72-minute unabridged audio book of it on Amazon as well. And all the, as a shameless plug, all the illustrations in the book are hand cut from paper sourced all over the world. Our artist did an amazing job with all the illustrations in the book. So thank you very much for allowing me to present this information today. And I'm so excited. I'm next going to Prague in 2 weeks to present at the International Leadership Association on this topic, on human intelligence versus artificial intelligence in decision making in leadership. And we'll open the floor up to any questions. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Bean. If anyone has any questions, please post them in the Q&A. We still have a few minutes left before the end of the day. We appreciate your thoughtful presentation. It was very helpful and really created a lot of critical thinking around bias. So thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Whoops. Here I am. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I hope that you'll continue to use information wisely, and we'll all be good stewards of it.
We do have one comment in the chat. They
Okay.
were asking if you could share the URL again. It was at the beginning of your presentation.
Oh, sure. For the survey?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So here, I'm going to put it right in right now. It's tinyurl.com/your biases. And it may not be hyperlinked there because I didn't put in the HTTP, but if you copy that into most browsers, it'll take you right there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You bet.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I would just like to thank everyone for attending the conference today. We hope that you enjoyed it. And just a reminder that there will be 3 more sessions tomorrow starting at noon, so please plan to tune in again. And thank you again, Dr. Bean.
You're welcome, everybody. Have a great day.